Hey everybody, welcome to the 19th Hole Golf Show. I'm Ryan Balaji. Thanks for being here with us. Happy Masters Week to you. It's a great week already so far. We're recording this on a Friday morning when the first round is just finishing at Augusta National. The second round is just starting. And it's just been great so far. So hopefully you're enjoying it and will enjoy it throughout the course of the weekend. My daughter's birthday is on Masters Sunday. She was originally supposed to be born on Masters Sunday 2016. Fortunately, she came a couple days late, so she is not forever associated with Jordan Spieth putting a couple in the drink on 12. And no offense to Danny Willett, but Danny Willett winning the Masters. Today's show is about the Masters, and I had some ideas, a couple of different ideas at the start of the week of what I would do for a show. And one of them, I thought I would just kind of talk about my experience at the Masters in 2011, one of the kind of zaniest Masters there were, and kind of go through the scenes of that. And then I kind of decided against that because the show was, especially in this iteration, kind of meant to be about someone else, not meant to be about me and what I've done or where I've been or anything like that. But it's kind of have conversations with other people that I've met because of golf. And so I wanted to stick with that. And it worked out just perfectly to have Ward Clayton as my guest this week. I've known Ward for, oh gosh, probably the better part of 20 years, at least 10, I think, at this point. He's in the PR side of things these days. Used to be more in the journalism world with the Augusta Chronicle. And he does work for the Masters tournament. He does content for Masters.com. That's probably where you've seen his byline. He's an excellent writer, really thoughtful guy, really enjoyable guy to be around. And he has a book out that honors and tells the story of the caddies of Augusta National Golf Club. The member caddies, the caddies that have worked for the membership for the better part of 90 years in some form or fashion, and telling those stories and giving those folks their due, what they deserve. And it's a great book. And Ward was very kind enough to hop on with me this morning. He's at Augusta National right now doing his job for Masters Week, and to take a half hour to talk with me about the book and about the history of caddies at Augusta National, long past, middle past, and present. And I hope you enjoy this conversation with him. It really is a worthwhile read to check out his book, and we'll talk more about that in the interview. But for now, enjoy this conversation with Ward Clayton. Ward Clayton is my guest, and he is the author of a book that has come out in very timely fashion for this year's Masters tournament. It's called The Legendary Caddies of Augusta National, Inside Stories from Golf's Greatest Stage. Ward, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Just so everyone knows who's listening, we've known each other for a while from the PR world. You do content for Augusta National around the Masters and do a fantastic job with it. You're at Augusta as we're talking right now, as the Masters is unfolding for 2024. What made you decide to write this book, and when did you get the idea to finally do it?
20 years ago, I wrote the first version of this. What intrigued me, Ryan, was I was a sports editor at the Augusta Chronicle from 91 till 2000. And we did a lot of stories that were historical in nature. And occasionally we'd run into mentions of the caddies, but often it was just by their nicknames. And so I said, well, wow, I wonder what this person's real name is, what their background is, and so forth. And so that was a continuous storyline. And finally, in 1999, at the newspaper, we got a call from Vanessa Peterson Fox, whose dad was Willie Peterson, who caddied for 5 of Nicklaus's 6 Masters victories. And she called to say that her father had died in New York and to let us know about this. And so that sort of set that process forward over a 4-year period to try to almost do like an Ancestry.com family lineage kind of thing to try to find these caddies if they were still living, if they're family members, friends of that nature. So that started a pretty heavy research period of that time to try to find some of these guys. So I think my main impetus to this was try to give them their due in regard to the job they had done and also who they were off the golf course.
For a generation, like I'm almost 41 years old, I kind of am right on that edge of the era when Augusta required Masters contestants to use an Augusta National caddy versus bringing your own. Has that how has that decision affected how caddies are thought of maybe at Augusta National or by the patrons themselves who are attending the tournament?
I think the All Black Caddy course set the bar. You know, you'd have guys that were terrific at reading people, at reading the greens and yardage, and they did a lot of this without a yardage book. They did it in their heads because they walked the golf course so often. There's an example this week. There's a guy that Tommy Fleetwood's caddy got sick and was not able to come from the UK, so he picked up a guy named Gray Moore. And Gray is a white guy from Augusta, but he's a longtime caddy here. And Tommy, over the last number of years, when he comes to Augusta pre-Masters, always got Gray to caddy for him so he could scout the golf course and say, hey, this green's changed, this tee's changed, you got to watch out for this. So he was already familiar with Gray. So he felt comfortable when his regular caddy was sick to say, oh man, I can lean on Gray to help me out with getting around the golf course. And I think when play ended yesterday, he was 2 under at the turn. So it was a nice choice by him. And I think a lot of people really in this community in particular have really gotten to behind a situation where they're trying to honor a lot of these caddies. So there's a real movement afoot. And I could cite many examples of that. Number one, they're going to redo the public golf course, the Augusta Municipal Course next year. Yeah, and that's where a lot of these caddies grew up. Sandhills, the community where many of them grew up, is going to probably put a historical marker within the next year. I don't know if it's going to be a historical marker or artwork. There's even a play going on at the Laney Museum, which is a black history museum, where they took the original book I did, and the executive director there did a script. And I went and saw it last week, and they had local actors portray some of these caddies. And in the middle of it, Ryan, this was the coolest thing to me. They had this lady who was a terrific singer sing like period songs, like she was singing The Temptations' My Girl. And everybody in attendance was singing in unison. I felt like I was in the middle of Hamilton for golf or something like that. So it was pretty cool in that way. So I think my main purpose in all this is try to bring the attention of the job these guys did, which was excellent, but also some of the barriers they had to get around just to get to their workplace.
Just before we get into that piece of it a little bit, what did that feel like for you personally to be able to sit there and see at least some of the fruits of your labor kind of turn into a different celebration of the Augusta Caddy in a different medium?
Well, I thought about, I was involved with a documentary called Loopers 5 years ago, and this book was great, but I'd never seen it in that kind of medium. So it was really cool to see somebody's it's more of an interpretation. You take a book and put a script, and you get an actor to do it, and it was a completely different experience. I thought, as a matter of fact, they call it the men on the bag experience. So that was really neat. And so I've encouraged some of our brethren in the media. They showed it again Wednesday night to go see it. I don't know how many did, but it was cool to see it in a different way. And hopefully I'm not the only person telling this story. I think there's a lot of people that want to spread the word about the job these guys did, from Carl Jackson all the way to Willie Peterson and all the way up to Gray Moore, who I mentioned earlier.
And I would want to put a plug in for Loopers as well. It's a really fun movie to watch. It's not specifically around Augusta National caddies, but really the idea of caddies in general. But it's a really, really enjoyable movie, especially if you're a big golf buff.
Cool, thank you.
For players these days who are competing in the Masters tournament, when they're coming to play practice rounds, and I assume they come in at different kind of intervals and different frequencies depending on their experience and how they've kind of figured out their cadence of how to prepare for the Masters. But how many players kind of come into Augusta National with or without their regular caddy and decide, you know what, I need to bring one of the local loopers in to give me the lowdown, as you mentioned, kind of in Tommy Fleetwood's experience with Gray of, all right, here's what's different, because Augusta National will tell the world, hey, here are the big changes you're going to notice, but they might not necessarily announce to you the subtle ones that you won't notice until it's too late.
It's more than the example I cited. There's a gentleman who's caddying here. His name's Steve Kling, And
Yep, I know
Steve,
Steve from social media. He's great.
yeah, Steve is pals with Ted Scott. And Ted even comes up here and stays with Steve. And Steve is also pals with Dustin Johnson. So those guys will come in the 3 weeks or whatever before the Masters. And the policy at Augusta National is if Dustin and Austin Johnson come up here, Dustin cannot have Austin caddy for him at that time. He's got to get an Augusta caddy. But Austin could go around with him with his yardage book and
Yeah.
draw these changes. And so those guys are doing a terrific job of advanced scouting for these, because Austin's here 1 week. He's not, except for that little quick visit. So he gets all the intelligence of Steve walking the golf course, 50 times or whatever during the course of the year and really learns from that. And those are examples I know of, but I'm sure there's probably more that occurs because these guys want to know this place inside and out when they're only here, maybe a couple of rounds, weeks before the Masters, then Masters Week. And Masters Week is difficult to ascertain everything about the golf course because you got a full gallery, you're trying to get around, you're sort of overwhelmed by the Masters Week. So I think it allows them to sort of get their feet on the ground before they even get here Masters Week.
I want to take it back to the beginning of Augusta National, early 1930s. What is the genesis of the Caddy Corps for Augusta National? And then when the Augusta National Invitation Tournament starts, what was the impetus to have Augusta caddies represent the players on the course? Was that a function of knowledge of the course? Was that a function of their job description? Was that a function of travel restrictions or travel realities at the time for professionals or other players who were going to compete in this tournament?
I did a completely new chapter, Ryan, in this book. It's about the neighborhood. It's called Sandhills. Sandhills is located adjacent to Augusta National and Augusta Country Club. And it's a Black community in the middle of historic cemeteries, those two historic golf courses, and also Walton Way, which has got these humongous houses. Post Civil War, a lot of freed Blacks settled in this particular neighborhood because they could easily walk to these big houses and serve as maids, butlers, cooks, landscapers. In the same vein, kids in that neighborhood, as you came to the 30s, 40s, and 50s, could walk next door and caddy. Jariah Beard, who's no longer with us, tells a great story. And when he was 11 years old in 1952, he went to Augusta Country Club to caddy, and his father forbid him from caddying because he thought caddying was equal to being a gambler. And so he goes to Augusta Country Club and makes $3 on his first bag. And you say, wow, that's not a lot. But you think that his parents worked at the local mill and they made $14 during the week. So he almost made as much money in one day as they would, if you do it over a 5-day period. So he made as much money. And he came home and took that $3 and put it in a coffee can and buried it under his front porch because he didn't want his dad to think he'd been out gambling or caddying. So a lot of those guys, much like you and I or any American kid, you're a product of your environment. When I was growing up, I grew up 6 blocks away in Durham, North Carolina from the public golf course. And in the other direction, about 2 miles, was Cameron Indoor Stadium at Duke University for college basketball. So to this day, even though I'm a North Carolina Tar Heel, college basketball and golf are my passions. Just like these guys, they learned how to caddy at Augusta National. So that's in their blood. They really became experts at that. And, in times of civil rights in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and the 70s, they had a lot of things they had to get around just to get to their workplace. So I'm always excited that they are getting their due, not just from me, but from a lot of different people, because they set the bar, not just for caddies at Augusta National, but, PGA Tour, things like that. I know, for example, Ryan Bones Mackay, who's been here caddying a long time and won a few here, green jackets here. Bones calls the caddy facility the Carl Jackson House. And it's not, it's just Carl's got such a cornerstone here.
For in the era when caddying starts at Augusta National, Augusta National is still establishing itself as this what it is now, what we think of it as now. But was it always kind of thought that way by the membership, in the 30s and 40s, and how did caddies who worked at Augusta National in those earlier years perceive the club, given Augusta National's reputation nowadays, maybe how it was thought of then, but also the realities that you talked about at the time of a lack of racial integration in the American South.
My thinking is these guys realized that they could join with their neighbors, friends, and develop an expertise that nobody else had. They were a bunch of friends, mainly from the Sandhills community, sometimes from Atlanta, sometimes from other part of Augusta, and they learned a trade, and they were the best at it. And that was their sole focus. They could work next door and become famous, help each other out. So I think that was their sole focus. I think a lot of times when you look at the Masters today, this year they're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the green jacket. At the same time, when you think of the clothing that's worn on site at Augusta National, you think of the white jumpsuit.
Yep.
And those guys wear that. Carl Jackson calls that the tuxedo of golf outfits. So, those guys wore that with pride because, Cliff Roberts has been questioned a lot of times for his positioning toward racial issues, but at the same time, he wanted those caddies to look uniform, much like he wanted the green jacket to look nice. So those guys wore that with pride because they figured that if they looked nice and did a good job, they were going to get their due. So there was a lot behind being a professional group, not only for the club but amongst themselves.
Well, it kind of make it sound like the Sandhills community almost is kind of like a fraternity in some ways of kind of welcoming people into the opportunity to caddy and what that might have meant for them at the time and throughout their lives. How were people recruited? How were people welcomed into this community if they sought to get into it? And then who did the teaching? Who taught the next generation of caddy or the next person who walked through the gates to be as good at it as everyone else?
There's a gentleman named Pappy Stokes. Pappy Stokes won 5 Masters. Both times Hogan won, Pappy was his caddy. Pappy's family lived virtually on the grounds at Augusta National before Augusta National existed. They worked at the Fruitland Nurseries, which was what was on the property before. So Pappy in the 1930s is 12 years old, and he's working with the guys who are building the golf course, tearing down trees, routing the golf course, and so forth. And he watches the rain, and it flowed from the upper levels of Augusta National up near 8 and up in near 9 and 18, and how everything went to Race Creek. That's how he learned how to read the greens. That's how he taught Willie Peterson, Iron Man Avery, Jeriah Beard, Carl Jackson, you name it. All these guys learned from him, not only how to read greens, but how to behave around the members, how to talk with people, how to learn. If Ryan Ballingee's on the first tee, they learn pretty quickly how they need to interact with you, whether you're nervous, whether you're cocky, whatever like that. They learn the fact of how to deal with you right from the outset. And I think that's they were almost amateur psychologists. They really were. So, and Pappy taught them a lot of that. One thing I learned, and I'd never heard of this before, Ryan, when they would caddy for the members back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the group would putt out on a green, and the caddies would give the driver to the member and his guest to go to the next tee, and they would take the putter out of the bag and go to the green and start putting. I'd never heard that because in one day a member asked Cliff Roberts, got mad at Cliff Roberts, said, "Hey, these guys are putting. Why are they doing that?" Cliff Roberts said, "How the hell do you think they're going to learn how to read the greens unless they actually putt on them?" So pretty astute on his part to understand the significance and the necessary knowledge these guys had to get to learn how to caddy. A kid would go to Augusta Country Club next door and learn how to caddy. That was like AAA baseball. Okay. And if they were good enough, the caddy master at Augusta Country Club would pass word along to Augusta National, "Hey, this guy's pretty good." And they would go across Race Creek and caddy at Augusta National. So it was almost like a promotional kind of thing. So it was very cool to hear stories about how that occurred, how they knew the golf course by sight versus by yardage book. So, a lot of that knowledge was all in their head, Ryan. It was really, really, really cool to hear those stories.
I mean, we think about golf, distance measurement, golf yardage books, laser etched markers, all kinds of different stuff today that makes it a whole lot easier to figure things out. But back in the day, it was probably by this branch or that tree or that bunker. I mean, you had to start to memorize your golf course to know what you were going to do, whether that was as a player or a caddy. So, I mean, effectively, that was a really critical part of the job, was knowing, what what tree, what marker, what. Yeah, you probably got pretty good at botany a little bit being a caddy.
Oh, no doubt. And to this day, Ryan, in the caddy facility, there's a diagram of each green on the wall, and on each green is a red dot. That red dot, and every caddy that I've known has followed this legend, has come into Augusta National, and they get those charts and get their yardage book and put that red dot. That red dot is the direction of Race Creek on every green. And
Mm.
so that's the first thing they do is, if you're on the third green and you look at your yardage book and there's a red dot on it, you say, okay, if this putt's got any tendency, it's going to go this way. A lot of times when you go to mountainous golf courses or golf courses at the ocean, it breaks to the ocean or it breaks to the mountains or away from the mountains. So it's the same principle here. Things break to Race Creek because it's the lowest point on the property, but unless you have that in your book, you don't really, you lose your bearings. And Pappy Stokes set that guideline, and those guys follow that to this day. Not everything breaks that way, but that's the tendency.
You kind of mentioned this before, but I mean, caddies then, caddies now, they're amateur, in some ways professional psychologists. I mean, you've got to know how to read people, you've got to know how to interact people, make them feel good, lift them up when they feel bad, keep them from feeling especially bad when they're playing poorly. How was there as much teaching around that as there was around how to read and measure and understand how Augusta National is played?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. And I think that benefited a lot of these guys off the golf course. You understood how to interact. And Carl Jackson's a great example. Carl and Ben Crenshaw became fast friends, and caddy and player second. But he also served as a caddy for Jack Stevens, who was at the time one of the richest men in the world, and also was the chairman of Augusta National. Carl worked for the Stevens family to this day. He and Warren Stevens, who's Jack's son, are almost like brothers because they're close in age. So Carl was astute enough to realize he had an opportunity off the golf course to work in his business going forward. And I went on Monday night. There's a new documentary out on Carl called Rise Above, which lasted an hour. And Warren Stevens was there, Ben Crenshaw was there, and it's the story of how Carl, who had to quit school at age 12, had 6 kids, all of them have college degrees. He went on and made himself a great person. Jack Stevens told him at the outset, said, Carl, I want you to amount to something. And I think Carl amounted to more than just something. So he a lot of those guys, much like Carl, realized they had to have personal relationships with members and players and how to act before them in order to be successful.
What is the difference? I mean, maybe what is presently, but what were the differences between interacting with members who are coming and playing golf at Augusta National as opposed to professionals looking to scout or prepare for the Masters tournament, or in many cases, playing the Masters tournament?
I think with members and their guests is probably understanding that the guy might not be the best player in the world, just a general amateur golfer, and how to, read putts for them or give them yardages so they can get the most out of their game. And I'm sure you probably had the experience of having a caddy, and it's a completely different way to play golf, and it's fun. And but when the player, who the professionals, they want more precise information. It's not 150 yards to the middle of the green; it's 157 to the back pin, and keep it right at the hole or something of that nature, because they want to be particularly specific about what they're looking at versus just the 15 or 20 handicapper. They just want to get the ball off the ground and get it near the green. So
And maybe you may do or don't have the answer to this, but for the Augusta caddies over the years that are caddying for people who are guests, maybe this is their one day ever they're going to get to experience Augusta National. What do they harp on most in advice that they give to those players that day? Is it about the putting surfaces? Is it about where not to hit the ball? What kind of is the most important thing to know if you're going to get to play this place once, and what you'll get from an Augusta National caddy?
The greens, more times than not. Ryan, if somebody today built these greens on a brand new golf course, the membership would revolt because these greens are so drastic. But you get on these greens with one of those caddies and you'll look at it and you'll think to yourself, oh, this putt's going to break 5 feet to the left. And the next thing you know, the caddy's got you aiming 20 feet left of the hole, making a putt to your right. It's unbelievable. And your eyes will fool you. You'll think to yourself, that's ridiculous. And then you'll follow the line of the caddy and, you'll put it up next to the hole. Whereas if you followed your original line, you might put it off the green.
Yeah.
So those guys know the green so well. And I would say not only in just Augusta National, but any place you go that's really a high level golf course, if a caddy tells you a putt breaks a certain way, you ought to try that. Don't use your own eyes because they've been around here a few times and can probably guide you along the way.
For the modern crop of Augusta National caddies, this week is probably a little bit different for them than obviously it used to be 40, 50, 60 years ago, Masters Week. What is it like for them the week of the Masters in the modern era?
They make most of their work on with members and guests, but there are a handful of the best caddies here who will be here in case there's an odd number field at the cut and they got to be a marker. I cited Gray Moore. He got a job working for Tommy Fleetwood because his caddy was sick. You see a lot of that come out in the Augusta National Women's Amateur, which was concluded last Saturday, because those young ladies will go play at a course here in Augusta for the first 2 rounds on Wednesday and Thursday, and then they come to Augusta on Friday, the entire field, and they play a practice round. And Augusta National, I always use this word, encourages the field to use an Augusta caddy during that practice round. And you'll see a lot of these young ladies who will have, like Jennifer Cupcho in 2019, her dad caddied for her the first 2 rounds off site.
Right.
And then she hired Brian McKinley to caddy for her in the final round on Saturday. And Brian is the guy who Jennifer walked off the 8th green in 2019 and she had a migraine headache.
Yep.
Lost vision in one of her eyes. And McKinley talked her through the next 2 holes. He found a member who got her a soft drink. He found a family member who got her medication. And she went through those 2 holes and went par. Miraculously, she felt better on the 11th hole. And then she played the last 6 holes 5 under.
Yeah.
And she attributed a lot of her winning to how Brian was there to help her out and was really cool. And if she wouldn't have had a good caddy, if you're having a migraine, you're probably going to freak out and go double bogey. But he was there to sort of support her, much like reading the guy on the first tee or the gal on the first tee. He was there to help her, and it worked out great.
One final question for you, and we'll kind of bring it all full circle. For the modern crop of caddies who are working at Augusta National, how much pride do they take in the lineage, the history that came before them? And how important is it for them to have not only the stories of the past told, but hopefully someday maybe theirs too?
Oh, I think it's terrifically important for them. They understand the history of this club, but also the history of that caddy uniform they're wearing. And they hear through the grapevine it's passed down and hopefully will continue to be so about not only the level of expertise the guys had, but the interaction. There's a terrific amount of humor that goes on between a caddy and a player. I cite Charlie Cootie when he had his caddy in 1971, Cricket. The guy who was trying to hide from his boss by wearing a towel over his head during the final rounds of the Masters. And Charlie Cootie wasn't worried about Nicklaus and Miller chasing him down. He was more concerned and laughing at his caddy wearing a towel over his head. So the humor got him through that. There's no doubt. So I think a lot a lot of those guys learn the fact of, how am I going to interact with somebody who's a member or guest? Because if Ryan Ballengee and Ward Clayton went out and played Augusta National, we'd be freaking out. We're not worried about where we're going to hit it. We're looking for, here's where Mize chipped in, or here's where Tiger did something of that nature. So I think they bring that to life and help you get through the sort of how you're just in awe of the place. So I think they totally understand their lineage and their expertise about how to move forward with that.
Ward, thanks so much for taking the time out, especially during Masters Week. I know it's extremely busy for you to be able to talk about this. This is a great conversation. I highly encourage everybody who's listening to this, go find his book, find it wherever books are. I mean, Amazon's probably the place most people do it these days, but I may be wrong about that. But the book title is The Legendary Caddies of Augusta National, Inside Stories from Golf's Greatest Stage. Ward, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you, Ryan. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks so much to Ward for being on the show. It really means a lot to have him come on from Augusta to tell that story. There are so many different things to talk about when it comes to the Masters, and you really have no shortage of content. But some of the most important stories are the ones that have long since happened and have such a critical influence on the Masters tournament, on Augusta National Golf Club today. And those caddies, past, present, and future, are incredibly important to that story. So I'm very glad that Ward was able to come on and do that with us. Next week on the show, we'll talk about the Masters. I have a couple of ideas. Again, not exactly sure who we're going to line up quite yet. May go a couple of different directions with this, but we'll have another longer conversation about the Masters and the impact of the tournament. And maybe then we get into 2011 a little bit, but I think we'll save that for another year. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions, email me, ryan@thegolfnewsnet.com. I'm on Twitter, Threads, X, Instagram, Blue Sky, @Ryan Ballengee. I am on Facebook and YouTube @Ryan Ballengee Golf. And you can follow Golf Newsnet on all of those services at the handle Golf Newsnet. Thanks again for listening. We'll talk to you next time on the 19th Hole Golf Show.